Hi, this is bookbinding's podcast, and today our guest joins us from New York. This is Richard Minsky, a bookbinder, book artist, bookbinding teacher, and lots of other things more. Founder of the Center of Book Arts in New York and Manhattan, and we hope to discuss lots of things from the past, lots of things from the current moment, including NFT books or NFTs for books and something else. We'll see how it goes. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Stefan. Hi, Pavel.
And Pavel, my co-host, as usually, joins us from Moscow. Hi there.
Hi, everyone.
Well, let's dive in. How it all began.
Could you perhaps first set the scene for us? Because your childhood was what, early 60s, New York, right?
Yeah, well, okay. And let's start my childhood in junior high school. It was a good time. Let's say that's 1958. I'm in junior high school. So yeah, I'm born in the late 40s. I grew up in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and I'm still. My first class in junior high school that I was assigned was graphic art shop with Mr. Caputo. Joseph Caputo was the teacher. And he was an inspirational teacher. And I was 11 years old, and that's when I learned hand type composition. I learned to hand feed a 10 by 15 motorized Chandler and Price platen press, the basics of dry point etching, half-ass bookbinding, and the like. And that stayed with me, so that by the time I was
So is it an official term, half-ass bookbinding, or?
Yes, that's the official junior high school name for it anyway. And I loved it anyway. I took other, shop was normal. It's not done anymore. But in those days, they started you in junior high school with a print shop in particular, because New York was the printing capital of the world, and they wanted to see who was going to be good enough to go to the high school of printing, because they needed to supply printers to the printing trades. And although I wasn't inclined to be an employee as a printer, I did love it. And so when I was my senior year there, which was the 9th grade, and I was 13, I bought a small platen press, a 5x8 Kelsey press, and 6 cases of used foundry type, and started a printing business with my homeroom class as a 15% commission sales team. So everybody in the class made money and I had work.
Who did you sell it to? What was the market like? Who were your competitors?
I had no competitors because these kids would sell printing to their parents. So I would do stationery, and one of the students' fathers was a piano teacher, for example. So I would print the invitations and the programs for the piano recitals of his students. A local clothing store, Fella Fashions, she had me print twice a year her clearance sale postcards, 1,000 postcards. This is with a press that, you pull the handle down like that. I had a muscle here. They called me the one-armed Popeye in junior high school because this muscle was like that. You print 1,000 of those,
Yeah.
But it was job printing. But I loved the Ditto machine, and at that time also I joined the Junior Astronomy Club, and I became the production editor because nobody else wanted to have the mimeograph machine, or nobody else's parents would let them have the mimeograph machine in their house. My parents were dead at that time, so my grandmother was fine with her if I had a mimeograph machine in the house. It didn't bother her at all. So I had my printing press and the mimeograph where I printed the Junior Astronomy News every other month. That's my first printing press.
Okay.
The one, do you see my little hand here?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was the one that was under the Christmas tree when I was about 10. And this is the one I bought, my first real printing press I got when I was 13. That was an early thing I printed. when I realized, back in those days, now everybody has a printing press on their desk. Printed things mean nothing anymore. But in those days, nobody had I never understood why everybody didn't have a printing press in their apartment, because of course I had one, and a mimeograph, that was normal. But everybody believed everything. So I was able to take rexograph stencils like ditto machines, spirit duplicators, and make forged bus passes when I was in junior high school for my friends so that people could get on the bus for free. And I made myself this working press pass because I realized that if you had a yellow thing shaped like a shield that was sealed in plastic and said working press, nobody would get close enough to read the details. It was just stuff left over from a Junior Astronomy Club invitation that I had printed. And that's how I was able to get that close to Lyndon Johnson. And I was the first hand that he shook when he got out of his limo, because I had the working press and I had my 4x5 camera. So I looked very official. And that was my first year at Brooklyn College, and he was visiting Brooklyn. So the Jay Rossman, the curator at Yale, thought that would be a good thing to put in my 50-year retrospective exhibition near the beginning as an example of how I approach book art.
I recently had a big problem recruiting kids to a little workshop, introductory bookbinding. So I should have told a story just like this one, and I will next time.
Well, it's interesting because that's the card that I actually used to make that. I joined the Junior Astronomy Club when I was in junior high school because I was interested in astronomy. And I went to the first meeting. They used to have big name astronomers like from Princeton and everything come, because the club had been in existence since 1929. And they met in this lecture hall at New York University. So I went there, and here was this famous astronomer giving a talk to 7 teenagers. So that was my first time there. I said, how come there's only 7 people? This is such a great talk. And they said, well, nobody comes. So I said, I've got a printing press. I'll print 300 free guest lecture tickets for the next lecture. We'll send it to the 150 high schools in New York, to the chairman of the science department, and we'll tell them to give them to their 2 best students. And that way there's competition to get them instead of nobody, wanting them. And the next lecture, there were 300 people in the lecture hall.
Yeah, that's a good solution.
So you've clearly always known how to promote your work and other people's work.
And other people's work, yeah.
Well, that was still when something being printed meant something. I mean, now if you want, people to do something, you just make it as a Zoom session and you post it on a place where 30,000 people are going to see it, and you post a link, and then you have to turn people away.
I think you're exaggerating. The market is so oversaturated with virtual things that actually real things became to be more valuable. I think a good poster often sells the show more than a good name does.
Well, before the age of COVID, when people would actually go somewhere, but it's coming back.
Yeah, I hope so. At least that's something we want to discuss during our next live stream next Wednesday. Well, for the moment when we air this this talk with Richard, it will be some past live stream that happened a couple of months before or something like that.
But then it might be the dead stream, and it can do it as a memorial.
Well, I hope it wouldn't be that one yet. So you started more as a printer than a bookbinder and bookmaker. When did this shift happen, and why?
Oh, when I added bookbinding was, I would say, when I was in college, I got more interested in bookbinding. I got some introductory books on leather bookbinding, and I started making some book bindings that weren't very good. But what happened was I was going to originally be an astrophysicist. That was my interest. But I did great the first year, but the second year I had an auto accident where I ran into a truck turned in front of me that was carrying like 30 crushed cars. and had this big I-beam as a bumper. And on a rainy day, made a quick turn in front of me. And I ran into its I-beam. My head hit the steering wheel, and I had permanent brain damage since then. So my sophomore year in college, I had a hard time focusing on things. And I left physics, and I didn't like the physics teacher anyway. He was boring. My first year physics teacher was great. He would do demonstrations where, like, lightning would jump across his arms, and and he wouldn't tell us how it was done. He said, if you want to know, go do the homework and read the book. It was a very great way to teach. The next year, the guy wrote partial differential equations on the blackboard all the time, and that was not very interesting. So, but that came in handy because I switched my major to economics, and I went into theater, and I continued on in music. I started playing the violin when I was 8, and all through elementary school and junior high and high school, I played in the school orchestras, classical music, and I sang in the chorus in junior high. I was a soprano as a kid, but when my voice changed, I became a second bass, the lower bass, so they put me in the chorus because I could sing those notes, and then in college, I also sang in the chorus at Brooklyn College. It was a great chorus. Got to sing like the B minor Mass and the Mozart Requiem and stuff like that. And then in graduate school, I went to Brown University in economics. So I graduated in economics. And after doing all this other shit, I would do whatever would keep me from going to classes. So I would sing in the chorus. I was in a readers theater touring group, and I was a varsity saber fencer. So all of those things excuse you from going to class. So I spent most of college doing extracurricular activities. So anyway, when I was at Brown, they gave me, I did well anyway. I graduated with honors in economics, and Brown gave me a fellowship in economics. And I didn't particularly like their economics department either. It was really the bastion of capitalism. And so after a year of that, I took my master's from Brown and went to the New School for Social Research, which was the bastion of Marxism, which turned out to use all the same textbooks. They all used Henderson and Quant's microeconomic theory and taught that profit maximization was the goal of the entrepreneur. My father had been a not-for-profit entrepreneur. He founded a thing called Religious News Service. It still exists. It's where I get my news. It's called Religion News Service. You can go online and find it. But so I came from a family of not-for-profit and entrepreneurship. Is probably why I started the Center for Book Arts. That's following my father's footsteps of not-for-profit. So that didn't fit in with economic theory either at Brown or the New School. The Marxists also thought profit maximization was the goal. They just disagreed on how to divide up the profit. So, exactly. So I gave up on all of that. I did my PhD work at the New School, but while I was at Brown, the week before classes started, I was wandering around the campus to orient myself. And I had a dorm in the Graduate Center, but just down the block was the Anne Mary Brown Memorial. And in there were 2,000 incunabula. So I'm in there, like, with this, bookbinding porn, and just spending way too much time for a casual visitor in a place that nobody else walked in while I was there.
But that's beautiful. What else do you need?
But after about an hour there, this guy comes up to me, he says, "I'm the curator here. What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm looking at the bindings." I said, "I love book bindings." He said, "Oh, you should go see Dan Knowlton, a university bookbinder in basement B of the Rockefeller Library." So I walked over to the Rockefeller Library and met Dan Knowlton. This is all before classes started. And I fell in love immediately. The smell of it, what he was like an old family that came over on the Mayflower. He was like, he's the real thing, And he had finished all the restoration of the Anne Mary Brown collection of incunabula and was working on one of the other collections at the time. But I said, "Oh, I'd love to learn from you." Well, he taught an evening class in bookbinding at here. I have this is not on any of the websites, but you can see there is my Brown University A in bookbinding from Dan Knowlton. So that's what I did, and I cut classes in economics, which made the faculty very grateful. The second semester, I registered for four entire classes. That's a full semester of independent study and research, and spend my time in the bindery. And I had a carrel there where I mean, they had great books. My interest in as an undergraduate was the history of economic thought, and there was a great teacher at Brooklyn College of that. And nobody taught it at Brown, but the library had the 1776 edition of The Wealth of Nations with the signature of the Minister of Finance of France in it, and of the time. So I mean, that's when I really got into the vibes of books and getting a sense of the people who had held them. So I would read this book transformed to 18th century Paris and see it through different eyes of what it meant then. And that made me say, well, what did he know? So I hadn't learned Valrat and Quesnay and the physiocrats that preceded Adam Smith. And so I took out my Dictionnaire Larousse and got that, because it hadn't been translated into English, or they didn't have an English translation. So I was able to, I had studied French for a few years and all that. So I was able to understand where Adam Smith was coming from and how he was different from the physiocrats. So being in the library to Carroll and not going to class really helped me understand the history of economic thought while I was learning bookbinding from Dan Knowlton. So here I can show you. So that kind of brings you up to something. I'm not quite sure what, but somewhere, this was the first full leather bookbinding I did in 1968 as a student of Dan Knowlton. And the way he taught was, first thing you learned was leather bookbinding, tight back, raised cords, laced in boards. After that, he taught double raised cords, then sewing on tapes, and then case binding. So we learned bookbinding pretty much in the order that it evolved from about the 13th century or thereabouts forward. Then we learned, and here's the next leather binding I did was the first tooled binding I did. I still have this set of Grolier tools that I did that with. The book was Douglas McMurtry's History of the Book. That was the title of the book.
This was the first tooled binding you've made.
That was the first tooled binding I made.
So everybody is just being really jealous at the moment when they see the first tooled book that you've made, and that's the one you showed a moment ago.
Okay, well that was still 68. Anyway, the following semester I did this one because he taught then the French method of onlay, where you paste your leather onto a piece of craft paper, pare it from the back until all you see is the grain, then cut out your pieces and paste them onto the book and press them in, and then wet the paper and peel it off. That's how these, well, this piece in the middle here, this black, wasn't part of my design. This is for the Georgics of Virgil. It was a nice Depression era 1931 edition from Cheshire House that I had bought that had no covers on it, because the great thing as a bookbinding student is you get beautiful books that have no covers pretty cheap. And that's what the Cook's Voyage had been. And that was, Captain Cook's Voyage, the original edition. So this one I designed, since it was the Georgics, I thought I'd put some flowers in the corner and related a little bit to the subject matter. And I blind tooled the title in the middle of the cover, but I got the leather too wet and the tool too hot and burned the leather. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh dear, what do I do? And Dan said, he said, fill in your tooling with auto body filler, sand it down, then design an onlay to go on top of it, and then tool on your onlay. So I took these same drawer handle tools that I had used for the corners, and it took me 3 months to pare a piece of leather with a French knife until I got it with no holes in the middle. So that's how I learned to sharpen a knife and to pare leather, was doing this particular onlay right here. And then I tooled it in gold because, I figured out it would look better on the black. So it actually made a better design. His notion was, if you mess it up, I will try to keep my language appropriate to an audience here.
Thank
then
you.
Use that to make your design better. So that was my third full leather binding.
That's a great lesson, and that's something that we discuss quite often on our podcast. And I saw just a few days ago somebody commented on one of my posts. I don't know, I don't remember about what, but about some perfect bindings, and there started a discussion that's well, one of the most important things for bookbinders to learn is how to fix their mistakes, and to learn from their mistakes, and make new mistakes, and learn how to fix them. And sometimes when you are fixing mistakes, you can make even more beautiful and well-designed binding. So that's a great illustration that you showed us just a moment ago.
That's absolutely true. I have a motto for that I follow, which is I try not to make the same mistake 3 times in a row, and the 4th time I try not to be too hard on myself.
I think it also helps not to have too precise a picture of the result in your mind, because if you want to do exactly something like it is in your mind, you probably won't succeed. You need to have this flexibility. I want something of that sort, and the vision changes, and so does the work. I love this process so much. Do you still make mistakes? Like, is it every time, every second time?
Do I ever get it right? Is, you know, my biggest tool is the garbage can. That's, you know, I next week I'm starting my many session. For 40 years I've been doing workshops in critique for artists, for curators, for librarians, for dealers, for writers, and where people learn to self-critique as well as critique other people's work. And so I have, you know, I used to do them live. Last year I started doing this by Zoom, getting people from all over the world, from United Arab Emirates and Brazil, it's Norway. It's amazing how that changes everything. But one of the subjects I go over is called garbage or archive. And I, you know, before, you know, it's always a question of, because, you know, my archive is at Yale. And so there's a question of every year I have to bring my process materials. And that to me includes all my mistakes, or enough of my mistakes that show something that I've learned from, that when you see the finished product, you see what I did wrong to get there. Because the idea of an archive is, if someone is going to bother using your archive, they're studying what you do and what your process is. So it's always the question of, does this go in the garbage? Now, the 3rd or 4th time in a row, of course, it goes in the garbage. But, you know, it's but that's a real question for practitioners of anything to think about, whether they, you know, if they're interested. I was always a hoarder, or a, you know, of everything. And so I, you know, that's why I have these things from my childhood still, because I just didn't throw things out as long as I had room for them. That's why I ended up, that's what happened with my archive. That's why Yale got it, because I had all this shit up in the attic. And when our kid was getting to be, you know, above a certain age, Barbara says, well, I got to put Samantha's Barbie dolls somewhere. Would you get your crap out of the attic? So I, you know, put it up for sale, and, you know, sold it to Yale, because I, you know, I had to do something with it, because I didn't want to lose it and throw it in the garbage.
Yeah. Well, that's something that's a question. That's a question I often ask myself, because of course, when you have how do you say it, iterative process, iteration process with your designs, for example, where I'm making some new tools or something like that, experimenting with designs. Of course, you go through lots of different versions, and I try to save at least some of them for the future, for my personal reference, to understand how the which processes I went through, how it evolved. But on the other hand, I see that sometimes people, I don't know, 10 years after beginning some project or something, start to become quite sad when they don't have any archives from the beginning, and they can see how it all began, and because they didn't make this their goal from right from the start to save at least some elements of their creative process. And I guess there is some hoarders, some hoarding here. And I guess I'm a hoarder as well, in a way, but that there should be some hoarding in your life, probably.
Well, if you have any success at anything, it's best to keep track of your process. For one thing, it helps keep your ego in check.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That helps a lot.
Could you tell a bit about the next big shift in your art, which is shifting from just making books to making book art, and book art that is a social commentary? I understand it was the late 60s, early 70s, so there was probably a lot in the air, but what moved you to go there?
Oh, Horace Callan. I would say Horace Callan, the same way that Joseph Caputo got me started and Dan Knowlton taught me bookbinding. It was Horace Callan, I would say, who turned me into an artist. He was one of the founders of the New School, and how I discovered him while I was for 2 years a graduate student in economics at the graduate faculty, which had its own building in New York City. I was walking down the hall on the way to a class, and I see this figure floating, streaming down the hallway with long white hair and a cape and a bowler and high button shoes. And this is in 1970. And a black cane with a silver top, and I ran into the nearest office and said, "Who is that? I want to take his class." Because that's why I was in all these different things in college. And the way I took classes as an undergraduate was I would go to registration and I would look for who is teaching from their own book. And I didn't care what it was. That's how I got into Reader's Theater. I saw Melvin White teaching from the Reader's Theater handbook that he wrote. And so, because I think if someone's teaching from their own book, they won't be boring. It was that one boring physics teacher that made me never want to be bored again. But so I see this guy walking down.
So he also taught you a lesson.
He taught me a big lesson, right? And if it wasn't for him, I'd probably have been a physicist,
What a loss.
The thing is, the partial differential equations did come useful in economics, and they also come in useful in bookbinding and in everything else I do, because the whole concept of having many variables and hold all but one of them constant and just vary that one thing so you see its effect independently of the other variables was a very big lesson. So, there were other lessons that I learned, besides change your major. It was, I see this guy. I go in the office and she says, "Well, that's Horace Callan." She said, "If you want to take his class, you have to register now for next semester because he's retiring. He's 88 years old." And so I said, "Okay, I'll take his class. What is it?" She said, "The philosophy of art." So all of a sudden, now that's half of how I became an artist. So I took there were all these philosophy students in there. Their heads were down, they're taking notes. I could not take my eyes off him because he would levitate. And his head would float up in the air. At least that's the way it looked to me. I mean, given the other variables of what 1970 was like, and I was also and you talk about making it political. I was also in a guerrilla theater group protesting things like the Kent State massacre and other stuff like that. We were doing street theater, what was called agitprop, in the 1930s times, but.
How very Marxist.
Well, duh, So it was, we were going, I'm not going to go into it. We would do some heavy duty stuff. But the key thing is I got to read the classics from Tolstoy's What is Art and Kandinsky's Concerning the Spiritual and Art and Stanislavski on the Art of the Stage and how you create your creative circle. And all of the greats of, of the philosophy of art. And that got me thinking about, he was great. Here's how he started. The first class, he says, what's a creation? He said, when you take a shit, it wasn't there before. It's a creation. And that's on that he built his theory of aesthetic. He'd written like 37 books on this, but it was, at the same time, I was earning a living because I was a bookbinder. I had gotten a job through some nepotism of being the bookbinder to the Joseph H. Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, which was then being built in Washington, but was in storage in a warehouse in New York. So I would go there once a week and I would get all their books that needed rebinding or fixing or repair. And I would take them to my apartment and I would bind them, and fix them, and I would read them. So I read a lot of art books while I was doing that at the same time as I was taking this philosophy of art class. And so I got that education. And then it got to be just magazines. I told them to take them. I read a few, I got the idea, and that was political also. I mean, that was in, magazines like Art Forum from the era when they were talking about when Rockefeller's Mother's Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, would do Jackson Pollock catalogs that were distributed in Eastern Europe as an example of America's freedom of expression. So I got to understand the relationships of, books, art, politics, propaganda, and how those things all work together. And so with all that, I told them to take the magazines to a commercial magazine binder, and do that. I didn't really want to do them because also their photographer was a junkie and wasn't showing up at work. So, what I mean by junkie, a heroin addict. And so they needed a photographer. Well, I'd been a photographer. I was my high school photographer for the newspaper and all. That's another story. There's many stories, but I knew how to take a photograph. So I took the civil service test and became a G7 museum assistant, the only job I've ever had. I've otherwise been self-employed my entire life. So I'm sort of unemployable because of many things. But I got the job and I photographed 2,000 paintings and sculptures. So I had to go in the warehouse, I had to take the stuff out and set it up and photograph it and put it back. So I got to handle all this art and it started rubbing off on my hands. So at the same time, I was learning about the theory of art and the philosophy of it and aesthetics and binding the books and reading about it. I was also touching a lot of it. And so, there was all of that going on. And so that changed me from being a bookbinder and printer to a book artist. And it was in 1971 that I sold my first work to a book dealer. I'm not a book dealer, I'm sorry to say that, and it wasn't a book dealer at all. It was to Alan Stone, who had the Alan Stone Gallery. He was an art dealer. I didn't yet know about book dealers at that time. And I'm kind of sorry that I didn't stay in another world because it pays much better. So I did that. And then I had a show, I joined the Guild of Book Workers. I had what they used to be at the American Institute of Graphic Arts, and they had a single exhibit case. So you got to have a one-person show there. So I think it was 1973 or thereabouts, somewhere around there, that I had my first exhibition. I suppose I could maybe I don't know if I can show you anything from that.
Sorry, which, I want to return just a moment back. Which one paid better, art dealer award or book dealer award?
Oh, no, well, at that time I was in the art dealer world. So my first real exhibition was at the Zabriskie Gallery on 57th Street.
Whoa.
And that was in 1974. And then, I had a show at Alan Stone's in 1981. And I had another exhibition at Zabriskie in 1988. And I had my exhibition at the Louis Mizell Gallery in Soho in 2002. That's where I showed my Bill of Rights. We can get into all that, when we get up to that point. But in terms of what you were asking about the transition, that was how I transitioned to a book artist. And to me, I was a book artist, so I wasn't. Now, I identified as a book artist, but there was no such thing as book art. So I said, I was working for Mr. Lerner, Mr. Lerner, Abram Lerner was the director of the Hirshhorn Museum. And they commissioned me to do a gift book, with inlaid stuff for Joe Hirshhorn for his birthday. Everybody was alive then. Nobody's alive anymore. But so Mr. Lerner was in the warehouse one day. And I said, Mr. Lerner, I said, I've been through thousands of works here. You don't have a single book that's a work of art in your museum. And he said, well, he said, if you want books to be recognized as art, he said, you're going to have to start an organization to promote it, like start a nonprofit organization and put on exhibitions. And that way you'll get museums interested in books as art. And that was 1971. And it wasn't until, well, I left the country shortly. Then I left the country April that year. I moved to France. because Nixon, you know, and so I didn't really want to be in that country. So I moved. First I went to England and then to Paris, and I set up my tent in the Bois de Boulogne. And then I brought my fiddle and a tent and a backpack. And then I went to the American Center on Boulevard Raspail, where I started meeting other musicians. And I was in 3 bands playing the electric violin. 2 of them were in the Festival de Montparnasse in 71. That was fun. Big band jazz, you know, folk rock, blues, that kind of stuff. So anyway, I came back because I realized that I liked the freedom of thought in New York that did not exist elsewhere in Europe, because the tie there to 1,000 years or more of civilization had a groupthink that wasn't working for me. And so I said, I think one thing that we have in America that they don't have here is a lot of land. So I can probably find a little more space to be away from whatever the horrors of government might portend. So
well, not in New York though.
Well, I still had the apartment I'd grown up in, which was a 6-room, 2-bath apartment that was, you know, like $99 a month, you know, rent controlled. So you know, at that time, so that was considered space. You know, wasn't an easy space to find. You know, in Paris, after I moved out of my tent, I was living in a house with a bunch of other artists and like mimes and, you know, different kinds of things like that out in the outskirts of Paris. But which was what I loved about Paris is I would go down to the nearest restaurant, and after I ate there 2 or 3 times, he says, "You've been here a few times." This is all in French. He says, who are you? What do you do? I said, "I'm an artist." And he said, "Well, what kind of art do you do? Are you a surrealist or a cubist?" You know, because, you know, that's, you know, the French. And so I said, "Well, none of those, but I said, I can show you something." And so I showed him some like kind of abstract expressionist things I had, you know, painted. And he said, you're an artist. You can't pay for he said, "You have to eat here every dinner unless you have an excuse and you can't pay because you're an artist." I mean, that's France, you know, that was not America in those days, nor will it ever be, you know. It said, "If you're an artist, why don't you get a job?" Or, you know, or something. Anyway, so anyway,
well, maybe America will change. You know, there is still some chance for that.
Well, you know, America has got a lot of things going on simultaneously. There's that, you know, and anyway, I came back. I borrowed $5,000 from the United States Small Business Administration and opened a storefront bookbindery, print shop, and art gallery in Forest Hills, Queens in 1972, and ran that for 2 years. And I was able to pay the bills, kind of, but never really made any money. It was not easy. I realized that if I started a not-for-profit, I could make more money, because in addition to earning income, there could be grants and stuff like that. So I decided to start the Center for Book Arts, because that idea had been planted in my brain by Mr. Lerner. And so I said, okay. So first I sent out a call for apprentices, and apprenticeship in book art, I called it. And there was no phrase book arts at that time that anybody was using in 73 or thereabouts that meant anything like what we think of as book art today. And there was no concept, but I had friends like Barton Benish, who did these sculptural books, like, you know, with the nails through them as a censored book, and Stella Waitskin, who did the cast resin books, and Marty Greenbaum, who did these books glued open with bottle caps and cigarette butts and trash in them. These were my idea of book art, as well as limited edition printed books. I knew printers, bookbinders, and all that. And of course, I was in the Guild of Bookworkers too. So I wanted to put all that together. And there were artist books. Then there were the artists who were making books that were made on Xerox machines and offset printed, where they were visual literature. And that was another form of book art. So I wanted to put all of these in one place, because those books were being made pretty badly. And they were like no craftsmanship. And then these people who were doing well-crafted books were really boring, and so I really wanted to put a place where they could see each other's work, that the people who were doing exciting books could see things that were well made, and the people who were making books well could see exciting books and mix and match. And if they didn't want to embody those things themselves, they could collaborate, where someone, who wanted a better made book than they could, and someone who wasn't inspired, that way, wanted to work on. So people started doing collaborations of things. So the idea was to make a collaborative space where people could be excited by each other's work. And I started putting on exhibitions and classes. The first 2 years, I taught all the classes in bookbinding and printing, because I couldn't afford a teacher, to hire a teacher. Because fortunately, it was 1974. So it was like the height of the recession, or the depths of the recession. So I was able, for like $312.50 to rent a month, to rent the storefront, which the reason the Center for Book Arts happened was, I'm sorry, I'm just rambling on these tangents. I talk in tangents, so you can stop me anytime, and just. Well,
it's perfect.
Okay. So
anyway. you draw the picture with with these white brush strokes and.
By the way, sorry, I really, I'm afraid I'll forget. The way you described the situation that led you to founding the center, how the books, arts and bookbinding are disconnected, and how one seems to be not really art and the other seems to be not really well made, and etc., etc. Many people today would say the situation is not that different. In fact, many of our guests said as much, certainly about the disconnect, not about the quality, but about the disconnect of the communities, that designer bookbinding, book arts and bookbinding proper all seem to ogle each other from their own corners slightly aggressively, and they don't really connect. There aren't that many collaborations. Is it no longer your experience? Do you still see those collaborations growing around
you? Oh yeah, they're happening every day at the Center for Book Arts. You see it all the time, and I believe you'll find that also at the Minnesota. No, there was no Center for Book Arts then. And then, well, I can just diverge for a minute into what happened. Was Barbara Lazarus Metz, who was a member of the Center for Book Arts, who lived in Chicago. This is around 1980 or so. Came to New York and said, I want to start one of these in Chicago. So, I ran her through the business model. Because I understood the institutional economics, I was able to create a survivable organization. So I had an income and expense, and I had all of the elements of what it takes to make a successful operation. So it didn't take more than 2 or 3 hours to communicate that to someone who had an entrepreneurial inclination in this field. So she started Artist Bookworks in Chicago. It eventually became the Columbia College Chicago Center for Book and Paper Arts, which then, because they went institutional and joined a university, was defunct by the university, which is why the Center for Book Arts remains independent. You don't want to become a tool of an institutional structure that can eliminate you. But that's what happened. Fortunately, after it went defunct after she died, so she didn't get to see that happen. But and then Jim Sitter came from Minneapolis. Annabelle Lee brought him into the Center for Book Arts, and the similar thing. He wanted to do that in Minneapolis. The same 3-hour. This is the income, model. He was a great entrepreneur, and in Minneapolis there was not much competition in the small arts organization like in New York. So he got 3 times the space that we had in a year. Did a fabulous job. Minnesota Center for Book Arts is still booming, and then and Mary started the San Francisco Center, based on the same model. And now there's dozens, if not hundreds of them everywhere. The London Center for Book Arts. So it really, and the only distinction is Center for Book Arts is the only Center for Book Arts. Everything else is the Minnesota Center for Book. Everything else is required to have a modifier, but I didn't trademark it as a franchise. I thought it should be independent to every location, and it would work a lot better that way. Because I was an artist in a field that didn't exist. So, I'm still somewhat of a failure as an economist, since I've created a huge amount of supply in that field between the Center for Book Arts and all the other teachers. I know Bob Rubin, who had a big book arts, had a big book arts collection. It's being distributed, but he traced back all of the teachers in all of the other centers, and all the students had, like 95% of them came one way or the other from a Center for Book Arts background, teacher, this or that. But having created all of the supply, I didn't create enough demand, which is one of the reasons I'm focusing more on criticism, and the Center for Book Arts is doing the book art review now, and I'm on the book art theory committee of the College Book Art Association, because one of the problems is for collectors. Now, Pavel, you talk about the bookbinders and the book artists, but we can lump the bookbinders and book artists together and put all the other artists in a separate thing if you want to start getting like where the money is, So, there's still that. And that's one of the reasons is that in the wider field of art, there is a large amount of critical methodology and critical theory that helps to establish, besides the fact that there's an art world and a lot of insider art stuff that goes on there, and that you brought up the Swiss vaults in a recent session. And I thought what was interesting about that is those vaults contain NFTs, and you wanted to put NFTs in the subject. We can get to that later, but I look at the Matisse in a vault, the Brancusi in a vault that never sees the light of day, and the ownership that changes hands, that is an NFT. It might not be on the blockchain. It might be through Sotheby's or Christie's or through a bill of sale in a private transaction, but it still is a non-fungible token, and its meaning has become even less as art, as there are images out there of it, and the physical object with its magical vibration stays in a dark vault, which is about as bright as the blockchain.
Well, I wanted to add a bit to the discussion of disconnect between book arts and bookbinding, and I know that we already moved on a bit from this topic.
We'll come back to Bleecker Street later on and why the Center for Book Arts was at 15 Bleecker Street.
Yeah, but I just recently published our first Spanish podcast just yesterday from my perspective, and once again probably it will be some time ago from the perspective of the viewer of this podcast. But that topic also was discussed there, and there also, at least in some languages and in some cultures, there also is this linguistic barrier between book arts and bookbinding, because as far as I found out, as far as I know now, in Spanish language there is no term for fine binding, and there is I should read it. It's encuadernaciones artísticas, artísticas. So it's artistic bindings, but it's an umbrella that covers everything: design binding, fine binding, artist books, so everything. And there is this sort of miscommunication in the Spanish part of bookish world, how to separate all these things. And as far as I remember, I discussed with somebody else. I'm not sure which language was that. Maybe Spanish as well. That oh no, it was Italian. We talked with a book conservator from Italy. We talked with Paolo Fagnola, and she told us that there is no difference in Italian language between restoration and conservation. So there is this mix-up as well. So sometimes there is not only, cultural or ideological barrier between these fields. There is also a linguistic barrier, which is maybe even more important, because if you can't communicate things, it's hard to to bring them to this world, to make them real. So yeah.
And this is probably where critical theory of bookbinding and book arts should step in, because there is no common framework, at least not common to all the actors. What is your take on it? Should there be, or is there an appropriate theoretical apparatus to discuss book arts and bookbinding and everything together, or are they separate things for you?
Everything is. There are many critical apparati for this. In my critique workshop, I generally take 3 or 4 or 5 of them. I take the Johanna Drucker model, which is how a librarian or a curator will look at it, which is pretty much a metadata point of view, in which you examine all the different elements of it. I can give you the links to the essays. There's the Gary Frost methodology, which is about the haptics of it. He looks at it as an engineer would. And there's my own, which is what Yale called the material meets metaphor methodology, in which I look at the physical object as a material, like it might be stone, or it might be paint, and I look at the image that it is. I mean, it's a painting of a girl dancing ballet. I'm sure you've seen them, and then you have your internal metaphor, the metaphor of it, which is your internal experience, which is different for everybody. So and that's the way I look at these things, and that's how I create work. If it's not working, I say, are these things in balance? Because what has to happen for me is the vibration of space. And when I was a kid, my mother was a member of the Museum of Modern Art, and we used to go there for lunch. And I would look at these works, and some of them, they were going like this. The works with, sculpture or painting, some of them would just vibrate the space around them. I always found that so magical. And it wasn't until I finished Horace Callan's course that I began to understand what that was about. And now and starting more or less, what is that now, 40, 50, 71, 50 years ago? So I'm looking at this picture of a ballet dancer, and I walk up to it, and I'm having my experience of a girl I knew who danced ballet as I'm looking at that. And somebody else may have their own experience of having danced ballet. Everyone has their, but I'm having that experience, and I'm thinking, I'm looking at this picture, and I'm get close, and all of a sudden it dissolves into just blobs of paint, and it's all of a sudden I'm just seeing it as paint. And I step back, and there's that image of the ballet dancer, and then it's all seems to be simultaneous, and it's vibrating. And that vibration is like the way an old movie projector worked, where you're seeing like at 24 frames a second or whatever it would be, and there's a slight flicker on the screen. And because it's the flicker is that shift in perception from the image to the object, to it's just paint, it's a ballet dancer, to the internal experience. So it all seems simultaneous, the way a movie seems to be continuous. But so for me, if my work doesn't feel magical, I say, what's wrong with it? Is the image not strong? Is the metaphor not strong? Is the material not strong? Are they not balanced to each other so that happens? And it doesn't have to happen. I do work that doesn't have much metaphor. It has a strong material and image, and that's decorative art. And I love it. I love decorative art. I do a lot of, geometric book bindings and things like that are wonderful material and image, but not so much about metaphor. And there are ones that are very little material. You look at a picture in a magazine of the Mona Lisa, you're looking at image and you're looking at metaphor, but the material isn't there. You're looking at an illustration. There's good illustration. A lot of photographs have that. Photography in general has that problem of not being illustration, of creating that vibrating space. And photographers go to great lengths in printmaking with platinum and palladium and different kinds of paper they print on and this and that to create a activated surface, so that it brings the viewer back to the reality of it's a piece of paper with silver on it. And so it's that. So for me, that's so there are very, very many methods. Then there's the socially involved aspect of it. Does this work involve a current social issue or a universal social issue that it's bringing? So there's lots of critical paradigms that you can bring to the work, and different works are going to bring different critical paradigms depending on what the goal of the work is, what the intended or who the intended audience is, and the like.
And do you think if you are an artist, you have to bring all of that or some of that? Can you just be an intuitive artist, searching around for a pleasing image and a good craftsman and yet create something deep? Do you need to be versed in all the theory?
As I said, if you have a strong image and a strong material, you can have good decorative art. You then get to the question: is it good? My late friend Rose Slivka, who for 25 years was the editor of Craft Horizons magazine, which was a great magazine that really delved into everything, had a whole bunch of sessions where I was on this panel of 4 people. It was me and Pete Volkas and what's his name, who does the glass with one eye. And, there was 4 of us discussing the art-craft connection. Like, is it art or is it craft? All these things. And these were people who were like, craft artists. And after, she then went on, the American Crafts Council, which published the magazine, switched to the glossy magazine format from the intellectual magazine format. She left and started Craft International magazine with the World Craft Council, the politics of art publishing. But I said to her, Rose, so after all that, what conclusion did you come to? Is it art or is it craft? And, and she said, I'll paraphrase Picasso. If it's good, it's art. If it's not, who cares?
Okay, so you need to make it first and then decide.
Or you need to make it first and sell it to someone who's decided.
Yeah, and it seems nowadays to sell it, you need to be able to talk about it.
Exactly.
I think it's really important. Like every decade, I haven't been interested in art for that long, but even during that time, being able to talk about your art has become much more important. No, if you can't explain it to people, people often won't take the time to pay attention to it.
Why would anybody watch your show if nobody was saying anything?
So coming back to 1974.
Oh, Bleecker. Oh, why was I on Bleecker Street writing down the phone number on this empty storefront's window? I was on my way to CBGB, which was a punk rock club at the end of the street at the Bowery, to see Patti Smith and Television. And, the problem was I was living in my apartment in Queens, and, at 2 o'clock in the morning to go home, it was a 2-hour trip to, wait for the subway and wait for a bus or walk the 20 minutes, from the subway station at 2 in the morning. It was a hassle. And I'd been thinking about the Center for Book Arts. I made some attempts to get it going. I had 3 apprentices who were working in my apartment in Queens. And I was doing that, and I saw the for rent sign. I said to myself, if I started the Center for Book Arts here, I could put a bed here and I could sleep here, and I wouldn't have to take the subway home to Queens at 2 in the morning after I go to CBGB's, because I went there a lot. And, so I did. And I called up, and the landlord came down, and as I said, it was a recession. And so the rent was cheap and nobody was wanting the store. And it was a derelict neighborhood, literally a derelict neighborhood. This is right off the Bowery. This is where the derelicts were, the alcoholics who lived in the street. And, who across the street, they would go to the a lady of Loretto Church for their fumigations and to pick up their Social Security checks. And, you know, and it was that kind of neighborhood. And I said, this is perfect. And I brought my fiddle down there and to meet the landlord. And I was wearing my cutoff denim hot pants with my red Oasis goatskin heart on the seat of the pants and my red tank top and my fiddle. I meet the landlord, you know, he wants anybody to rent the place, even someone who looks like that. And so I played the fiddle there and it sounded good. I figure if a place has good sound, it'll be a success. And I had done the same thing with my storefront in Queens. I listen to a place and it tells me whether that's the right place or not. You know, it's all metaphysical, you know. So so that's what happened. And that became the center. I brought my 3 apprentices there. We spent a month getting it ready. He gave us a month free. That was the month of August. We sanded the floor. We moved in all the equipment. I had stuff that I had stored in my friend's loft in Brooklyn. When I closed the shop, I had my 8x12 Chandler and Price. I had the cabinets of, I had bought from a typographer that had gone out of business. I had bought a couple of double standing cabinets of you know, good lead type that had only been used to take proofs, you know, that were then used for offset printing, which is the way it was done. So when they went out, you know, as other typesetting methods came in, the lead type was auctioned off for almost nothing. The presses too, you get the presses for nothing in those days. Nobody wanted them. But so anyway, so I outfitted the Center for Book Arts and set up an exhibition and opened the doors. And 47 years later, 47 years later, we've got Center for Book Arts. Go to centerforbookarts.org and you can look at the exhibition history. So over the last 47 years, we put on, I mean, the exhibitions are wonderful. There's a great exhibition on now and more good ones are coming. But I mean, you could take all the classes and just about anything you want that has to do with book art. You go to the exhibitions. You can go to the exhibition archive by clicking there, or you can shift. Okay, and then you can go there. So I changed it to past exhibitions to see there are now 304 past exhibitions up on the site that you can go to. You know, and you can see exhibition catalogs. And I posted one on your Discord just yesterday, right? To the effects of time that I did some time ago. That was a great exhibition of, you know, go to the iBookBinding Discord channel and take a look at that. It's
yeah, absolutely. Everybody go to this iBookBinding Discord channel. Yeah.
Post a link to your Discord channel so people can go there.
Yeah.
It's really, it's, you know, it's that will become a good forum in time as more people get on Discord. Yeah. Anyway, so that's how the Center for Book Arts came to be.
Thanks a lot, Richard, for this talk. I also wanted to say thanks to you for supporting us on Patreon.
Everybody should support you on Patreon. It's very important that you can afford to do this.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for that. And I should say that all the money that comes from Patreon goes to editing of these videos. So that's not like we are profiting from that. Even more, we have to add our own money to do all this stuff with our project. So if you like what we do and you considered helping us in any way, please check the link below in the description. Pledges start with only $1, €1, £1, depending on where you live.
Or if you have more money, start with $100 or $1,000. They really are doing good things with it. And if you have the money, there are very few places you're going to put it, and they'll do something special for you if you do that.
That's absolutely true. We'll find some way to, you know, get even. And thanks to all of our watchers, viewers. Thanks to members of our community. You can see the future videos on our YouTube channel, and you can listen to this podcast on our SoundCloud account and our podcasting platforms. You will find all the links below. You will find links to the objects, to the pages describing the objects we talked about, and to Richard's website in the description as well. And see you next time. Bye.
Bye.